Hey guys, this video is called Why High Vis for a reason. It's the case for color, and it's based on, or inspired by rather, a conversation that happened in the shop. One of our customers came in and I was helping them pick out some equipment, and some of the stuff was brightly colored, some of it's more natural colored, and they asked the question, why high vis? And there are multiple reasons for that, but mostly it has to do with safety, and there's a reason why most survival equipment is brightly colored. And so stick around for a few minutes and we'll go into specifically more why that is the case and which is right for you and how you decide which is right for you. So hang on a minute and we'll get into that. In the case for why high vis, it's because most people, unless they've undergone some kind of training, military training or training just the way I did as a kid, when the only decent outdoor gear was military surplus, and losing it could be bad, as you don't want to lose your survival gear. It can inhibit your survival. So when I was young, most match safes look like that we could find. We find them at the Army surplus store, and I don't know if maybe this thing will try to focus on it or not. It's too busy trying to focus on my face. So maybe I can get it to, there we go. You can see what I'm talking about, the olive drab match safes. And now we have options where they're more colorful. You get yellow, orange, red, what have you. The reason being is if you don't have some kind of training that has taught your eye to differentiate objects based on shape, even when they're the same color as the natural environment, then if you're already cold, fatigued, tired, and then encountering a situation where you need a fire, you're cold, you're wet, you're stressed out, that's not a good time to be trying to differentiate between leaves and your match safe if you've dropped it and it rolled under some leaves. So that's one case. Another goes into knives. Like, if you're forging, an uncoated knife with a high vis handle will stand out, and in the woods if you drop it, lay it on the ground. Whereas some of the knives, like some of the ones I carry when I'm out doing photography, wildlife photography, that's designed to blend in with the natural environment, don't stand out at all. Here you can see what I mean. The high vis handled SE4 with a plain blade stands out very plainly. You can see it just at a glance, even from this distance. Where the camouflaged buck combat knife just kind of blends in with its environment, even when you zoom in. And that's with them laying on top of the leaves. If it was a case where leaves had fallen on them, you can still see the SE4, but even though just as much is exposed of, well, almost as much, I'll try to do it more fairly. Just as much of the ground combat knife is exposed, but you have to get really close to see it. And under normal conditions, that's not a bad thing in and of itself. But at a time when you're already stressed out, you're cold, you're wet, it's raining, the sun's going down, the temperature is dropping into the 60s, then it's can be a bad time to have equipment that blends in too well in a natural environment. People tend to forget that, military equipment blends into the natural environment is because that helps with their survival on a different level. If they drop it somewhere on a mission, it doesn't stand out as easily. It may be missed by the enemy, and there will be hopefully more of them there to support each other if one loses a fire starter or what have you, and they can kind of look after each other. When you're alone, or you're the one in charge of starting the fire and keeping yourself or the group warm, or whatever the situation is, if you're not parachuting behind enemy lines or in the middle of evading from an enemy force, then subdued colors that blend in a natural environment may not be the best choice. I grew up on it. When I was first doing my survival studies and wilderness skills studies in the 70s, and we were in a recession, so really couldn't afford expensive high-end commercial gear, and the military surplus stores after Korea and Vietnam were full of lots of survival equipment, military survival equipment, like the green match safe that I just showed you, the canteen that I carry a lot of times, I used to, I don't anymore. Now I carry a Grail water filter, but most of my life I carried a military issue canteen, or my young life rather, because it had a canteen cup and a stove and all of that in it. It was all modular and I could carry it on my belt. So I had a water collection and cooking system right on my hip all the time. And growing up that way, my eyes were trained to look for equipment that was the same color as the environment around me, but different shapes. So I learned to look for shapes, not colors. If you haven't been trained in that way, your eyes automatically look for colors more so than shapes. That's a more natural thing to do. Look for something that stands out as much as possible. So this is the reason why that for people that aren't going in the military, I strongly suggest high-vis survival equipment. For people who are going in the military, I tend to strongly suggest that they train their eyes to be able to find the equipment they're going to be issued. And so it all depends on your circumstances on which is better. It's always subjective. It's just like anytime it says, what's the best knife you have in the store? Well, the answer is always the best knife for what? And same goes with survival equipment. What's the best water filter you have for what conditions? Where are you going to be? How many of you? There's more questions. There's no one do-all knife. There's no one do-all water purification system. There's no one do-all anything, because different environments work different ways. Now, from a distance, the sheaths of the knives kind of stand out because black stands out in the daytime in a natural environment because there's not a lot of it. However, it doesn't stand out at night. It disappears into the shadows. So, even on knives where the knife and the sheath are black, I tend to like blue fire starters and blue pieces of equipment. I've got, a blue bug out that I carry. My daughter's Swiss Army knife is blue, and that's because there's not a lot of blue in a natural environment. Some of my favorite fire starters are my Zippo lighter and my Nano Striker, both of which are silver in color, because there's not a lot of silver in nature either. But in looking at this from this distance, if you notice, the green match safe still just kind of disappears unless you know it's there. So that hopefully helps make the case for color for people who are looking for specific pieces of equipment as they go on their outdoor adventures. Speaking of foraging, I just found one of my favorite plants while I was on my way out. This is Solomon seal. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I started on a video specifically on this plant last year. Maybe I can get it finished up this year. But the flowers grow on the lower side of the stem and hang down, and that's where the berries will develop. And they will be dark bluish green. much like the stem, if it's picking it up, much like the lower part of the stem rather. But it isn't the berries or flowers that's best to know about this plant. It's the rhizome. It's a very powerful astringent, good for stopping bleeding. It's a good plant to get to know. From what I've read about it, it has other virtues I'm still reading about, but I'm not qualified to discuss. Thanks for stopping in. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's just a short one. It was just meant to explain the question of why high vis, and you can see for yourself whether it pertains to your circumstances, whether it would be more important in the future for you to buy more high vis gear for what you're doing and where you're going, or depending on your future plans, maybe you should endeavor to train your eyes to be able to spot organically colored pieces of equipment in a natural environment. The only way I know to accelerate that is to just buy the equipment and go out and toss it around and on the ground and just like drop it behind you and then turn around and see how fast your eyes pick it up, that sort of thing. It took years for me. I don't know that it took years, but I spent years doing it because I grew up in South Florida, and most of my training happened around Tampa Bay in the 70s. So like I said, most of my equipment was Army surplus. So the canteens, the knives were all military issue knives. They all came in leather sheaths and green canvas, cases, and green plastic bottles and green plastic match safes and that sort of thing. So in a world that is largely green, there was a lot of mental and visual exercises on keeping up with my gear when I set it down. One of the reasons why I chose the Buck 119 for so long, even after growing and learning other things, is because the silver blade, the uncoated blade, and the silver pommel kind of stood out, just like the Zippo did and the Spark did, or Nano Striker did a few minutes ago. There's not a lot of silver in the natural world, so that helps me spot my gear. Whereas the leather handle and leather sheath of the Pilot Survival Knife sometimes would just blend in on the ground, and it would take my eyes longer to pick it up. So I got to where I chose the 119 more often than the military issue knives when I was going out in the field for a long time. And then I got into wildlife photography and got more into camouflaging my equipment so I could get closer to the deer and closer to the turkeys and that sort of thing, so I could study them a little better. And over time, I just got a lot better at spotting my gear on the ground. So anyway, hopefully this gives you some food for thought on the question why high vis, and you can make better choices on the gear that'll keep you alive as you go forward. Take care and be blessed. We'll see you on the next video.